Okay, welcome again, everyone. I'm Christine Bigland from St. Mary's County Library. And tonight we have Barb Whipkey as well as Chip Whipkey. They are the owners of Wild Birds Unlimited in Lexington Park and LaPlata. And Chip is also an avid beekeeper. And tonight what our topic is planting to attract birds and bees. So we're very excited to have you both with us. Chip is generally the hand in the side that like hands things to Barb. So we're happy to have him in front of the screen tonight. Okay.
So before I turn it over to him, I just wanted to share something real exciting at the store. We are kicking off a Save the Songbirds campaign, and we are trying to really promote creating a refuge in your own backyard. Obviously, the last couple of years, it's become really important to have an enjoyable place in our own backyard. So one of the things we are doing is bringing in native plants into the store. So we have connected with a local nursery that only grows native plants. So today we did get our first shipment. We'll be bringing in 2 different plants at a time so that our team can become a little more familiar with those plants. They were giving me a hard time today about the learning curve with having to learn some new products. We had Chip and I were just at a show, and so we've got quite a few new products coming into the store. Today they got hit with a couple new ones that there was kind of a big learning curve for these new products. But the one was native plants. So the first 2 have arrived. The first one I have here is Pussy Willow, which is a native plant. This one is a great one, especially if you have a very wet area in your yard. This is a good one to plant. A lot of people aren't aware that it is a native plant. Not only is it wonderful for the butterflies in that, but you'll find that the fuzz, a lot of the birds will use that for actually lining their nests. So not only is it attractive, and you'll see a lot of songbirds in that landing on that. The next one here, and these are all in 1-gallon pots, so they're a nice sized plant. The next one is swamp milkweed. So this is another great one for the butterfly. Milkweed is the only plant that monarchs can lay their eggs on. So without milkweed, we would have no monarchs. So milkweed is a really important one to have in your yard. So those are just a couple ones that we do have in the store right now. These are in limited quantity, so don't hold off too long to get those if you want. We have them in both Lexington Park and LaPlata, so if you're interested in either one of those, hop into the store real soon. So I'm going to now turn it over to Chip.
Afternoon, everyone. I'm Chip Whipkey, my wife Barb. But I will tell you that I've got a real interest in planting for the birds and bees. As was mentioned, I am a beekeeper. I've been keeping bees since 2003. We carry some of the honey here in the store. But the important part about the planting for the birds and the bees is that we want to make sure that we're diligent in what we do. And that's what tonight's instruction will be on. I'm going to have a PowerPoint, and during this, I'd ask you please put questions in the chat. If you'd like, we can I'll probably go through all the slides, and then we'll come back and ask questions at the end. These slides will be available to anyone that would like to have them. The last slide in particular will have some different plants that you can plant, as well as some local sources. So if there nothing else, I'm going to go into screen share. And again, this is gardening for the birds and the bees. I have given this particular lecture both here in the store and in a couple of the local schools. It's always interesting when you teach 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders about gardening for the birds and the bees. They all chuckle at you. But it is as I mentioned, it's an avid interest of mine. I would like to point to the 2 photos that are on the front of this page. These are both photos that Barb took, but they do represent how the birds and the bees use the plants that are in our yard. The one up there in the top right-hand corner is a cedar waxwing collecting fruit off of a tree that's in our front yard. It's an ornamental crabapple. So those fruits hang on there into the fall. After it frosts, they get soft, and you'll find that the cedar waxwings absolutely love those. In the lower left-hand corner, you'll see a honeybee on one of the flowers that are in our yard. So what we want to do whenever you plant for the birds and bees, you want to start with a plan. You want to sit down and think about how you're going to see your yard change over the year. You want to focus on the height of the plant. In some areas, you may be restricted by an HOA, or you just want to maintain a sight line. So think as you plant the state of whatever the item is that you're going to plant, how much it's going to grow. And we're going to talk about different heights of trees and shrubs as we go on. There's also a seasonality effort or a seasonality perspective to these plantings, in that obviously many of our flowering plants, they'll come in, they'll have a flush of color, and then they tend to die back. There are some vines and small shrubs that have very interesting leaves, whether it be the shape of the leaf or the color of the leaves. So we're going to talk about trees, shrubs, vines, flowers, and hardscape. So we'll cover those in kind of in that sequence, but you're going to find that there is no discrete line between a small tree, a shrub, and in many cases, our full-grown maples and oaks as an example. So it's best to ensure that when you're planting, that you're planting native, non-invasive species. I'm going to have an entire slide or a slide that focuses on invasive plants. But you also want to be careful that whenever you go to Lowe's or some of the local nurseries and you buy hybrid plants, they may be very beautiful. But in many cases, those plants, the pollen and the nectar that they produce is much less than many of the natives that we have. So any hybrid, whenever you purchase hybrid plants, you have to be careful about that. Also, unfortunately, many of the plants that we buy from, and I'll say it, the big box stores, are plants that have been treated with some type of pesticide. And that's something we don't want to pass on to our songbirds. So it is an area that we need to be careful of. You want to start with a plan, as I mentioned, but there's no absolutes. If you've got an oak tree in your yard, you're going to plant around that tree. You obviously don't want to cut it down. If you've got, I've went out to folks' house and looked at them, and they said, "Oh, I've got a mound system in my yard, or I've got a place for my well where it comes up." You can work all of those into the design for your yard. It just takes a little bit of working. But again, although you want to start with a plan, there's no absolutes. You don't have a specific solution in mind that will work on every yard. You need to tailor it to wherever you live. So, Christine, can the people that are viewing this from home, it seems to be covering part of the graphic on my, at least on my side. Can our guests see the entire slide?
They should be able to. Like,
Okay.
It looks a little different from your point. Yeah, somebody
Okay, that's fine.
typed in yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so trees and shrubs. Again, we want to look to ensure that we want the trees that will work into your landscape. So size for your location. When you go to purchase a tree, you're going to find that those trees will normally have a small label on them or a small stand next to them that talks about the mature height of the tree. You want to pay careful attention to that, because they can, something that's only a foot or two tall can in 4, 5, 6 years become a tree that's towering above your house. So you want to be careful about that. But the reason that we want to plant trees and shrubs is they're kind of a bit more of a focal area for the landscape that we're going to create within our yard. They provide a hub which we'll plant our other trees around, our other shrubs and flowers around. When we do that, though, we're providing shelter and housing for the birds. So the trees and shrubs also, dependent upon the type of tree, and we'll talk about these in just a second, provide either fruit, some provide nectar, seeds, pollen. Over on the left side of your screen, you're going to see the larger trees. Mountain ash may not be one that you see much, but it is a great source of fruit for the birds. I'd love to see more people plant them. You don't find many of them for sale in your local nurseries. They are a specialty tree that you may have to purchase. And if you reach out to the nurseries, they may be able to get them for you. And again, I'll call out a couple of nurseries in our last slide. Oak's an easy one. Oaks and maples are trees that we tend to see around the periphery of our yards, or they are plants that you can easily get from the nurseries. I absolutely love this last one as a large tree, and it's the Washington hawthorn. If you're a member of the National Arbor Day Foundation and you have those small seedlings that they offer each year as part of the membership, you'll find that Washington hawthorn is frequently a tree that they offer. Washington hawthorn grows into a large tree, but can also be trimmed to a medium size or even into a small shrub. So it does provide a lot of flexibility. And again, it provides fruit and early pollen, fruit for the birds, and an early pollen source for the bees. Under the medium category of trees, you'll find dogwood, flowering crab, as we had on the front slide, flowering plum, and then various types of compact conifers or small pine trees. Again, it's a mix of fruit, pollen, and nectar that you'll get from these various plants. The dogwood, and again, we'll show a picture of it later, but the dogwood is really an underappreciated tree when it comes to a food source for the birds. And in the small category, we have plants like elderberry, hazelnuts, dwarf cherry, and dwarf conifers. Those top three on there, elderberries, hazelnuts, and bush cherries, my wife accuses me of grazing. In the summertime, I share with the birds. I'll go out in the yard and I'll pick the fruit from these. They're planted for the birds, but I'll go out and pick them for myself to consume. So you're going to find that in the small category, those three are a great treat for you, or for that matter, for your children or maybe grandchildren. While we're talking about trees and shrubs, though, one of the things that I would ask you to do is to consider leaving dead trees or snags at the edge or periphery of your yard where they're not going to be a hazard to fall on your house or anything. Or say if you've got a tree that dies in your yard, rather than having it cut down to the ground and having the stump dug out, you might consider, once it dies, cutting it off at 6 or 8 feet, maybe 10 feet, and then allowing it to decompose. That makes a great source for small insects. You'll find that the woodpeckers absolutely love it. In some cases, they'll create a cavity which other songbirds could potentially use for housing. There's also no need to remove all of the dead growth or flower heads as soon as they quit blooming. In some cases, you'll find that dead growth or even the leaves, as long as they don't pose a fire hazard, those leaves provide an extremely beneficial source or beneficial bedding area for something that all of us that have my age or similar to it kind of taken for granted for many years, and that's lightning bugs. What we found, though, is that the population of lightning bugs is really falling off. The reason for that is because we've gotten into such a habit of taking all of that natural ground cover, those leaves, and breaking them up and either sending them to the dump or putting them all in the compost bin. And by doing that, that light, loamy area that they would normally be able to lay eggs in and the lightning bugs live in basically for the first 2 years before they start flying, we're depriving them of that area. So consider leaving those leaves and small dead growth where it doesn't create a fire hazard. Now taking a look at the trees and some of the benefits in them. On the top left there is a pileated woodpecker. You can see that it's excavated a hole. That hole is one of two things. Either it's excavated it for to get insects in there, or it may be excavating it for a nesting area for itself. The center one there, we can see that there is another hole that's been excavated by a woodpecker. And what you'll find is those holes, after the woodpeckers leave, in many cases are going to be used by what we refer to as secondary cavity nesters. So they'll move into them. In some cases, squirrels will as well. If you look at the bottom left-hand side of your screen, you'll see a hole probably where there was a large limb at one time. And there's a screech owl that you can see that's back in there. Again, this is a phenomenal opportunity for you to provide much needed housing for some of our local owls. I would like to point though to the tree that doesn't have a hole in it, but it's got a whole bunch of those little tiny divots in the trunk on it and in lines that are going around there. The bird that's on the tree there is called a yellow-bellied sapsucker. What that bird does is it will peck those little holes into the tree. That tree then will leak a little bit of sap, and what happens then is sapsucker will come back and it will drink of the sap, but it'll also be collecting the insects that come up there and try to eat the sap as well. I left out that one of the cool things about some of these holes as well is you'll find that flying squirrels will sometimes inhabit them. You'll hear them at night, and sometimes if you hear a kind of a squeaky sound out in your yard at night, you'll go out with a flashlight. They actually have red eyes. So just kind of shine it up in the trees and you'll sometimes see a population of flying squirrels using some of these holes in these trees that have cavities. Now, looking at a couple of the trees, one of the trees that we talked about, the Washington hawthorn, you can see kind of in the center there, those beautiful white blossoms. And then to the left of that, the fruit that forms after the blossoms go away. These, again, are phenomenal sources of food. They hang on the tree into the winter, and they provide a great source of food for those fruit-eating birds. On the right-hand side is our eastern redbud. I think this is probably one of my favorite trees. It's a tree that very quickly, inside of 4 or 5 years, will grow up and start putting out these beautiful purple flowers early in the spring. But we'll have seed pods on it later on in the year that the animals will eat. They'll eat the seeds. You'll find the squirrels will be in there after them as well. But again, these are two beautiful trees that you can easily add to your yard. I will tell you with the Washington hawthorn, and you can see it a little bit in the photo that has the fruit on it down there on the left. It does have some very aggressive thorns on it, especially when it's younger. So you need to be careful about where you plant it in your yard if you have children or if you've got grandchildren that might be running around in your yard. Now, from the shrubs perspective, we've got a couple of plants here that are phenomenal, both for the birds and the bees, as well as for human consumption. That is the elderberry. It has these beautiful white flowers on it in the spring. It grows up into a small shrub, usually 6 to 10 feet tall. It will grow in just about any kind of soil. It needs a little bit of water to get initially started. But after that, it grows very well. It only fruits on shoots that are 2 years old. What will happen is it will come up the first year and it puts out a kind of a tender stem. The second, and then the leaves will drop off of it. The second year, it will grow more from that stem and it will bloom that second year and it will have fruit. The third year, it tends not to have fruit, so you want to go back in and trim out those 2 or 3 year old shoots to make sure it remains a very viable shrub. The bush cherry, it's a small cherry it's not like your normal pie cherry or anything like that. It's much smaller. They've got a huge variety of these now that are coming out. Some of them will come up into a small tree form, but for the most part, they're 4 to 6 feet tall. I will tell you that while I don't consider them to be invasive, they can, because the birds love them, the birds will drop seeds, and you'll find, especially around the area that you plant them, that there'll be a lot of volunteers that will come up. So you'll want to go in and just pull those out. Or if you want to set up a row of them, it's easy enough to transplant them because they are very easy to transplant and to grow. Continuing with small trees and shrubs, I mentioned to you that the dogwood earlier. The white dogwood is the one we commonly see growing out around along in the edge of the wood lines now. There's still a few blooms left. There are some ornamental varieties of dogwood as well. I don't know of any dogwood, as long as it will grow in our zone, that is invasive in nature. So you've got a lot of latitude. They've got dogwoods that have variegated leaves, green, pink, and white. And they've got ones that have really interesting fruit on them as well. The fruit of our local white dogwood is a small red berry. Again, these berries tend to hang on the tree into the fall and in early winter. There is another dogwood here, a shrub that I wanted to talk to you about because it's a great food source, and that's the gray dogwood. And that dogwood is more of a shrub, 6 to 10 feet tall. You'll find them in the edge of many times our wetland areas, but they come up and they have a white flower on them, but they also have a white berry on them. And again, the songbirds absolutely love these things. From a vines and shrubs perspective, I really think vines get a bit of a bum rap with regard to how hard it is to maintain them, and they just become an overgrown tangle. In many cases, people have when they think of vines, they think of something like ivy or something like that, which is an invasive. We don't want to plant those. But there are plants that have, or vines that have really a lot of benefit to us. Blackberry, raspberry, wineberry, grapevines. They're all great sources of not only food, but they also provide depth and provide outstanding hiding areas. So I recommend putting those vines up on some type of trellis, but that creates a lot of those little nooks that the birds can get in. You'll find that, especially in the wintertime, those vines, even though the leaves drop off of most of them, those vines will provide enough shelter to where you'll find the songbirds will be in there nesting in it. We want to make sure that whenever we plant as well, that we don't just plant what I call specimen plants, where it's just a singular plant and then you move to another spot and create a singular plant. You want to plant in 2s, 3s, 5s, so that you're planting in groups, or you've got that oak tree, underplant it with something, and then take advantage of that shelter that it provides. You might be able to tuck a couple of hollies in underneath it, and they complement one another. So I mentioned hollies. I am a huge fan of holly. I have people ask me what my honeybees collect for as far as food and nectar from for the honey that I produce. And the preponderance of the honey that I produce comes from holly. It's a very small flower, and a lot of people don't think about the flower, but it's a very small flower, but it does produce nectar fairly well. Elderberries we've talked about. Contonistener and pyracantha are, it's a pyracantha there in the flowers, or I'm sorry, the fruits at the left-hand side of the screen, tends to put out a very bright red or yellow berry. And again, great food sources. They tend to be low growing. So if you've got I see a lot of these types of plants on banks sometimes that they could be used as a solution where you've got a little bit of erosion occurring and you don't want to mow that bank with your lawnmower. You can plant some pyracantha or contonistener on those hills and it's kind of has a vining habit. It's low growing and it provides, again, food and shelter for the birds. I don't want to mention or don't want to miss out on blueberries either. I absolutely love planting blueberries in my yard. My grandkids love them too. But it's always a battle with blueberries on who gets them first, myself or the birds. So blueberries are a great source of nutrition for the birds. They're a soft fruit that the birds can eat throughout the summer. And if you'll mix it up, there are both high bush and low bush blueberries. So you can have basically a small cluster of plants that grow in that manner. Now, I will tell you that blueberries like acid soil. So even mixing holly, which is an acid-loving plant, with blueberries, you can sour the soil in that area. And really in many of the places, many of the yards that we have, the soil tends to be sour because you'll know that because of all the pine trees we have. But again, you want to make sure that you provide the right types of soil for your plants. And in doing that, blueberries, holly, again, like that sour soil. I will mention wild rose. Wild rose, we find it sometimes growing on our beaches even. And they tend to have very large rose hips on them. They're a beautiful red flower, a red fruit. They are different, though, than multiflora rose, which we'll talk about in just a second. So wild rose, again, I think is a great planting for your yard. Now, to talk about a few of the invasives and plants that we may have thought we were actually doing something good for our yard. The first one I'll talk about is burning bush. Burning bush it's an invasive plant, it really is. Once it gets started in your yard, you'll see them popping up all over the place. It puts out a small red berry that the birds absolutely love, but unfortunately, it does become an invasive over time. The one in the bottom right, if I could ask you to take one plant out of your yard, it would be Nandina or heavenly bamboo. This is one of the more common landscape plants for new homes that landscapers and new home builders will put in. The Nandina berry is toxic to songbirds. It will absolutely kill songbirds if they consume too much of it. And the challenge with Nandina is, and I've made sure that I've got a couple of photos here, you can see those beautiful red berries. They are a beautiful plant. They truly are. They will grow up. They've got a beautiful mounding habit. They tend to be a nice green color. When the frost hits them, they tend to turn red. So it provides a good color spot. But those red berries are toxic and they are invasive. Once they get started, you're going to find them popping up all over your yard. If you make the decision to keep them in your yard, what I would ask you to do is as soon as they bloom, and it has a white blossom on it, and I will tell you my honeybees absolutely loved them when I had them in my yard until I realized how invasive they became. They absolutely were all over them. What I do is now, or what I did for a while, is I went in and I cut all the blossoms off as soon as they faded so that I didn't end up with berries on. And then it's like, you know what? I'm not even going to do this. I'm going to find some native plants to put back in there to replace these and not take the chance on missing some of those flowers and allow them to form berries and potentially poison the birds. So again, would ask you to consider removal of any heavenly bamboo that you have in your yard. To the lower left is a plant called multiflora rose. The USDA brought this plant in, and it was brought in as kind of a beneficial plant for the farmers. The theory was that you could plant these multiflora roses along side of fence rows, and they would become living fences. The challenge is that they are very, very prolific. When they bloom, they set these red berries. Those red berries, as soon as the birds eat them, they pass through the digestive system of the bird. I think within days of them hitting the ground, they start to sprout and grow into new plants. So they're absolutely a huge invasive problem here in the U.S. And it's almost impossible to remove them once they've got a foothold in your yard or on your property. There are some different types of sprays that you can use on them, but it really tends to sterilize the soil. Nothing will grow where we've got chemical treatments that will kill multiflora roses. And again, they've got beautiful white flowers on them. They set these beautiful red berries, and people who sometimes don't know what they are can leave them in their yard because they think of them as wild roses. They're not. They are an invasive plant that was errantly introduced into the U.S. The last plant I'm going to talk about, it is actually a native plant. It grows native here in our area and in places to the south, and states to the south. Referred to as American beautyberry, a beautiful plant. It's got a mounding habit, and it has these just beautiful purple berries, but it is invasive. Once it gets started in your yard, I had one for a couple of years, then I realized that I had a whole bunch. And this was probably 5 or 6 years ago that I removed this from my yard, and I am still today finding American beautyberry popping up around the periphery of my yard. So we have to be careful about those invasives. From a flowers perspective, flowers tend to provide us either nectar or pollen for our birds, for our bees, or seeds for our birds. In order to get those seeds, though, we need to be a little less diligent on our yard keeping. If you want to have your American goldfinch in your yard, leave those cone flowers out. After the blooms fade, just leave them on the stem, or maybe cut them off initially in the spring, but then allow them later on in the fall to go to seed. You're going to find that they are much more attractive than anything you can put out in your feeder for a period of time, because the birds know those natural sources are better. Coneflower is absolutely phenomenal for that, but goldenrod and aster, again, are good sources of pollen and nectar. Perennial sunflowers are another plant that I would like to see more people use. We all see the annual sunflowers that come up and they form great big heads. Perennial sunflowers, and I'll have a photo of it later, they come back each year, and they will spread on you. So you want to make sure you're pulling them out as you start to expand your bed. You don't want any more. They're easy enough to pull out, but they're phenomenal plants. Yarrow and sedum are two other plants that are great for nectar. Barb mentioned the butterflies. Common milkweed is a great source of both food and shelter for the butterflies, and a place for them to lay eggs, and a place for the larvae to grow. Butterfly weed, swamp milkweed, as Barb showed earlier. Parsley and fennel are also great. You can plant them in your yard. You can let the butterflies, the larvae, eat some of them. You can bring some of them in for use in your kitchen. Joe Pye weed as well is great as a nectar source both for the bees and for the butterflies. For in this last column over here, I listed a few plants or flowers that the hummingbirds love. Cardinal flower is a phenomenal plant for the hummingbirds. It's a bright crimson red flower. And while we can put out 1 or 2 or 3 feeders and have that red spot, cardinal flowers planted in a large bed, it's like a magnet for hummingbirds. Foxglove also has a large throat in it for nectar production. Primrose, wild columbine are also great sources. And I can honestly say, although wild columbine is listed as a plant for hummingbirds, I've never seen them on it. The bees love it, but I've never seen the hummingbird on that. Blazing star and bee balm are also great nectar sources. And both of those set a fruit that the birds will eat later in the year. So here I've tried to provide some flowers. If you haven't shopped much at the local nursery, sometimes it's good to have a photo, to have a point of reference. And what these are just plants that I've taken, or I've basically pulled pictures from the web. A couple of them are from the yard, but sedum, the perennial sunflower is the second one there that I had mentioned earlier. The seed heads on these are about the size of a dime, and there'll be 40, 50, 60 of them on a single stem. These things get so full in my yard that I'll have to stake them up. But the goldfinch absolutely love them. Then we had blazing star. Joe Pye weed is the one there to the top right. Again, this is a plant that is taller. It's usually 3 to 5 or 6 feet tall, so it would be a plant that you could plant in a back of your yard up against a fence, and then plant other flowers in front of it. Swamp milkweed. This is a photo of small swamp milkweed in flower with a monarch on it. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the cardinal flower, you can see it there with the hummingbird drinking nectar from one of the plants. Again, deadhead early in the season, but consider allowing some of your plants to set seeds so that there'll be a source of food for your birds in the winter. One of the additional benefits of leaving those flower stalks in the wintertime is that I've talked about planting for the birds and the bees, but those stems that we leave in our yard from the various flowers in that, they also provide a natural home for our native pollinators. These is like the blue orchard bee or the mason bee. They'll drill a small hole in that stem, and they'll go down in it, and they seal it up with mud. They'll put a small egg in there, some pollen, and they'll overwinter in that manner. They'll grow out and they'll emerge as adult bees the following spring. But if we're totally clearing out our beds in the fall, we're taking all of that habitat away from them. Now for hardscapes. Hardscapes are just that. These are structures that we can use. Again, I'm showing a feeding station on the left and a bluebird hole system on the right with an arbor there in the center. This arbor might be a place where you trail those vines up over it. And it becomes absolutely beautiful if you can trail plants up over the top of that and they flower into the spring. And it can make a natural entryway into your backyard or side yard. Additionally, from a waterscape or from a hardscape perspective is water features. Whether it's a bird bath or a natural pond, it is important in our yards that we have water for the birds and the bees to consume along with the food sources that we're providing. So consider adding a water source into your yard. And in some cases, they really add an aesthetic that we can plant around. This is my final slide. And in this slide, what I've tried to do is capture a listing of the trees, vines, shrubs, and flowers that I recommend in a couple of local nurseries that I find to be very beneficial. The one that I don't have on here is the one that just recently opened. I will edit this presentation, Christine, and add that source to it if he's open for people to shop. The bottom entry there, prairiemoon.com, is a website that specializes in native plants. That link it will take you to their website. They are the quality of everything that I've ever gotten from them has been phenomenal. They are from the Midwest, but they do have an outstanding website that will give you a lot of information on the type of soil that you need, water conditions, so that it makes it easy to shop from them, or even to get some great ideas on plants that you might want to find in the local area, but just aren't quite sure what they look like. You can use their website to gain that information. Okay, I am going to stop sharing. And I'm open to questions.
Okay, the first question that we got was going back to leaving trees, like if they're dead. How long does it take for a 6 to 10 foot tree to decompose?
It really depends on the kind of tree it is. I've got a pine tree in our backyard that died 4 or 5 years ago, and it's about 10 to 12 inches in diameter. And oddly enough, I tried this spring pushing on it just to see if it was, I went up and after it died, I went up about 15 feet and just cut the top of it out, and I've left the rest of it, and it's still solid. Pine trees will tend to decompose much quicker, but if it's an oak, it can be there, 15 years, depending on how large the tree is as it decomposes, and it just becomes more and more of a habitat.
Oops. Yeah, there's a place in Leonardtown that cut the top of a tall tree off, and then they had like a chainsaw sculptor turn the top into the bald eagles. So there's another idea, because then I guess the lower part would be for the birds. I had a question for the flowers. Do you happen to know, can they thrive in pots, or did everything you talk about need to go into flower beds?
They certainly can. Almost all of those plants can thrive in pots. You'll find even some of the shrubs you can keep in pots, a little bit bigger, obviously. But yeah, almost all of the flowers can thrive in pots. The exception being the perennial sunflower. I think it would be pretty hard to keep it in a pot, only because it tends to be, again, it gets 6 to 10 feet tall, so it would just, as it waved around, it might tip your pot over.
Right. Oh, that's good, because I was thinking about what to put on my patio, and so as you were talking about that, I was thinking maybe some of those would work, but I like to keep them. They need to be in the pots. Okay. Oh, Barb asked if the recording will be available to share. Yes, because I'm recording it. It takes a couple of days just to get it closed captioned, but I'll send an email out to everybody who registered with the link to the recording. Okay, and Laura asked, is it better to plant trees and shrubs in the fall or spring?
The best day to plant a tree is truthfully in the fall, is the best time to plant a tree. The second best tree is today. It really is. I mean, it does require more work to plant in the summer because you really have to monitor the dampness of the soil to ensure that it's sufficiently watered. They do tend to do better if they can be planted in the fall.
Sorry. I had a question when you were talking about leaving the leaves stacked up like over the winter. Did you say that lightning bugs live in there for 2 years?
They do. You'll find that if you start doing this, and I was simply amazed at this. I started it just before COVID. I started leaving a couple of patches in my yard where where I actually rake the leaves out of the main grass area, and I've just started piling them here. And I can, you dig down in there and kind of pull it away, and they look like miniature lightning bugs. It's what they are. They're just small lightning bugs. But for 2 years, they live in that mulch area, and that area down around the bases of trees and that. And then in the 3rd year, then they start coming up and flying.
Wow. You guys make me feel so good about doing less yard work. I think
There you go.
Great. Okay. When is the best time to plant the sunflower perennial?
Actually, I transplanted some here just a couple of days ago. Now's a great time. Now, I originally purchased mine through the Prairie Moon. That's where I got mine. I have seen them in various seed catalogs now, though. So, Gurney or just look at any of the seed catalogs. But if you look up perennial sunflower, and actually the name of mine is Maximilian. It's Maximilian perennial sunflower. So that's one of the name brands for it.
You had talked about acidic soil, I think, when you were talking about holly and
Correct.
like planting something else with it. So what makes the soil acidic, and how can you check to see if it needs to be more or less?
Okay, there are soil test kits that you can get from the garden centers you'll take a little bit of the soil, you mix it with some water, and then you use an acid strip to determine it. And then there's a product called Mere Acid. You'll find it again in garden centers, and that's what will make the soil more sour. If it's too sour and you want to bring it back to more alkaline, you simply add lime.
Okay. How do pine needles affect the acidity of the soil? It seems I'd heard something about that, but I don't remember.
They do. They tend to make soil more acidic. Pines prefer an acidic soil to survive, so they're kind of a self-perpetuating cycle there. So if you, I like the idea of using what we have rather than going out and buying, bags of mulch. I prefer to go back in my wood line and rake up pine needles and use those for my bedding, as mulch in my beds. Now, it will slowly over time, if you continue to do that, tend to turn that soil sour. So what I'll do is I'll periodically just sprinkle some lime into my flower beds to keep the pH of the soil a little bit more acidic. I'm sorry, a little more alkaline.
Okay. Oh, I just had a question and I lost it. Anyone else has a question, pop it in the chat. Let's see. We'll back to
Christine, I do have one thing. I wanted to point this out earlier. I had, if you're looking for a good book to read, this is absolutely a phenomenal book. I had a chance to hear this gentleman speak a couple of years ago at a conference that we attended, and Nature's Best Hope, and he talks specifically about the way we need to, or we can change the planet starting with our own backyard. We can be the change for bringing back the lightning bugs, as an example, to providing habitat for native pollinators, as I mentioned. So in that's a phenomenal book. We carry it here in the store. You can also source it from your local library, but it's a phenomenal book.
That's great. I'll put a link to that in my email.
Okay.
I remembered my question. So you're a beekeeper, and so you're planting for the bees. Do you have an idea of what their range is? Like, how far will they go away from the hive to find the pollen? Like, does it need to be right in your yard, or can they go kind of far away?
Actually, I I don't plant for my honeybees because honeybees tend to like as big a return on their investment as they can. So if I were going to plant for honeybees, I would need to plant acres of something. So honeybees, whenever they forage, can forage out to 2 or 2.5 miles for nectar.
Well, it's nice. It's not all on you.
No, no, it's not. In fact, you really can't. We really don't have enough space for the majority of beekeepers to plant for the honeybees for food.
Oh, okay.
Now,
So
I will tell you that in the spring, I don't spray my dandelions. I like my dandelions because dandelion and crocus are two of the best sources for pollen early in the year for the honeybees, along with maple and willow. They provide great sources of early pollen for the honeybees.
Okay, there we go. I don't have to clear out my leaves and I don't have to get rid of the dandelions. This is great.
There you go.
So Barb asked, are you familiar with Butterfly Alley?
I am.
That's okay. It wasn't
Okay.
a trick question.
No,
Butterfly,
go ahead.
one of the master gardeners and her husband have this place called Butterfly Alley. It's on Hollywood Road.
Uh-huh.
They only sell natives. They're very familiar with it. If there's a markup, I'm surprised. I bought a whole bunch of plants last year for $2 a piece. Anyway, they're very knowledgeable. I walked out there and said, I have a really shady area. It's really wet. What can I plant? They took me through the inventory, and they have a demonstration garden. So they'll show you the plants and show you the transition. So I just thought I'd put it out there. And a piece of trivia, when you talked about acidity, coffee grounds will make your soil more acid.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, Barb just mentioned, I think that they're actually sold out for the year. Unfortunately, I think they're constrained with what they can grow. For them, it's a labor of love. So I've heard of them, but they're really not a consistent source throughout the year, unfortunately, because they do have great product.
Yeah, my apologies. I haven't been out.
No, I think it's great.
Yep.
Yeah, good to know what all the resources are, and also good to know that they're sold out right now, because that'd be disappointing to go out and not have anything. Now there's a butterfly bush, right? But that's not a good. Oh, is that a sore subject?
Okay, no, it is because they're and I should have listed those in the invasive plants and things that I don't recommend. I will tell you that. They do have that name, butterfly bush, and you will see butterflies on them. But they really are not a good food source for butterflies. It's just not a good nectar source. They're an imported plant, so our local butterflies, the nutritional value that you get from that butterfly bush just isn't a good return on their dining investment. Also, those after they bloom, butterfly bushes tend to set a small seed, which songbirds love, and they tend to consume them, and they spread it quite extensively, and they can be very invasive. So I don't have butterfly bush in my yard.
Okay, it's all marketing, huh? But the
Well,
name
and it's all about what we know. Again, I mentioned the multiflora rose. At one time, the USDA gave thousands and thousands of those plants to farmers as a solution, for low cost fencing. And now they're a problem across the entire United States that we cannot eradicate.
that is how it goes. Like we think we're solving one problem and sometimes causing a new one.
Yep.
So yeah, I understand. Okay, well, we're just about out of time, Chip. If there's anything else you'd like to add in.
Nothing I can think of. Again, we've got Nature's Best Hope. We've got a couple of different native plants here in the store now. We're going to be rotating. I think we're going to get 3 different sets throughout the year. I get in the store periodically, but if you have any questions and you're in the store, ask them. I'd be more than happy to try to get back with you and answer them.
Yeah, your staff is great with knowing the answers to all these questions. And it
Thank
was
you.
so nice having you with us today, Chip. And you didn't ask Barb to hand you a single thing.
Okay.
I think you should
Okay.
put her to work.
I can't think anything. I do. So she did hand me something.
Oh, the
So
book.
we do
Oh,
have, this isn't the book. What this is a fold out, or probably can't see all of it, but it's a fold out for butterflies in our mid-Atlantic states. So if you want to identify the butterflies that are in your yard, this is a good source that will allow you to be able to identify those. And we do carry those in the store as well.
And I would like to thank you very much, Chip. This was great information, and it's nice kind of background on supporting the birds and the bees.